Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks to the VMSG committee for inviting me to give this talk. Well, Kilauea is back in the news at the moment, and once again, it's filling its lava lake. But today, I'm going to briefly tell you the story about what happened in 2018, and hopefully convince you that we can conduct shear wave splitting analysis on the seismicity to image the subsurface cracking during the caldera collapse. So for those of you who don't know it, Kilauea is one of 5 volcanoes that make up the Big Island of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. Kilauea is the youngest and the most active of the volcanoes and makes up the southeast corner of the island. This is a map of the general geography of Kilauea. There's a summit caldera with a pit crater in the middle called Halemaumau. There are 2 rift zones, both of which have had fissure eruptions in the last 100 years. In the lower East Rift Zone, the last eruptions were in the 1960s, but since 1983, a cone called Pu'u'o'o, halfway down the East Rift Zone, has been erupting pretty much constantly. From there, the lava flows reached the ocean and the south coast. In 2008, a vent opened inside the Halemaumau crater at the summit, and there was a lava lake there. But all that was until the summer of 2018, when magma withdrew from both Halemaumau and Pu'u'o'o and travelled further along the East Rift Zone to erupt in the lower East Rift Zone in a residential area called Leilani Estates. The eruption in the lower East Rift Zone started with 24 fissures, and some of them had fire fountains up to 100 metres high. After that, it settled into a steady and voluminous effusive eruption. Between the beginning of May and the beginning of August, 0.8 cubic kilometres of lava was erupted in total. This covered 35 square kilometres of land, and some of the lava flows were up to 54 metres thick. 700 homes had been destroyed, but thankfully no one was killed and only 24 people were injured. Most of them were watching lava enter the ocean on a boat when there was an explosion. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to show you all of the exciting videos I have of the eruption, but I've managed to squeeze a few in. So that was what was happening on the surface, and this is what we think it looks like under the surface before 2018. Below the summit, there was a large magma reservoir, somewhere between 3 and 8 kilometres depth, and then there was also a shallow reservoir which fed the Halemaumau lava lake. However, the lava was rarely erupted at the summit, and instead it degassed, sunk back down, and travelled along the East Rift Zone, where it was erupted at Pu'u'o'o. It then travelled over the land or in lava tubes down to the ocean. But in 2018, instead of coming to the surface in either of those places, it travelled further along the East Rift Zone to be erupted in the lower East Rift Zone. And what that meant was that the shallow Halemaumau reservoir was at least partially drained, but we'll come back to that shortly. This is a great video that Jade made showing the automatically detected and located earthquakes between April and August 2018. They're coloured by depth and scaled by magnitude. The black triangles that you can see show the seismic recorders. In particular, I'd like you to pay attention to how quickly the seismicity propagates along the East Rift Zone to the eruption site. After that, there's a large magnitude 6.9 earthquake just off the south coast, which has a lot of aftershocks associated with it. However, notice that once the eruption is established, the lower East Rift Zone becomes eerily quiet and all the action is at the summit. Notice how the seismicity comes in pulses, which build up to a magnitude 5 earthquake and then shut off like a sawtooth. Now this goes on for quite a while, so I've sped it up slightly. Then, at the beginning of August, everything stops. The seismicity is lower than background levels. The lava stopped erupting. So to summarise what we've seen so far, this is an amazing data set. There are more than 50,000 automatically detected earthquakes within 3 months, sometimes at a rate of 150 per hour. Sequence was recorded by up to 40 seismic stations, as well as lots of geodetic and gas stations. Lava samples were taken throughout the eruption, and there was visual and infrared imagery, and not to mention all of the satellite data. There are so many interesting processes going on. In this talk, I'm particularly interested in what was happening at the summit. So as the Halemaumau reservoir drained, the summit caldera collapsed. But it wasn't just one large collapse event. Each of those seismicity pulses we saw accompanied an incremental collapse. They were really quite regular, happening about every 18 hours. And here we've got a video showing what happened at the summit. It's a time-lapse from a camera in the observation tower at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. It shows one image per day between April and August. At the beginning, the lava lake withdrew and there were some explosions. Then, as the magma was withdrawn from the reservoir, the collapse started. So what happened at the summit was really quite spectacular. There was over 500 metres of subsidence in the centre of the caldera and a total collapse volume approximately equal to the erupted volume down on the Lower East Rift Zone. The diameter of the new collapsed crater was more than 2 times the original diameter of the Halemaumau crater, and I want you to particularly remember the map on the right hand side and where the new crater is. Back to the seismicity, this is a plot of the number of automatically detected earthquakes per hour recorded at a seismometer near the summit. So you can see some of the features that we noticed in the video, and in particular there are these 62 sawtooth-like pulses of seismicity and then a sudden stop of activity at the beginning of August. And now on to the slightly more technical bit. Earthquakes usually create 2 main types of body wave, P waves and S or shear waves. Shear waves can be polarised in a way similar to the way light can, so that when a shear wave travels through a medium that is anisotropic, meaning that it has directional properties, it is split into 2 quasi-shear waves. The faster of the 2 is polarised in the orientation of the fast direction of anisotropy, and that we call phi, and the delay time between them, delta t, indicates how much the wave has been split by. When shear wave splitting is detected from local earthquakes, it's usually attributed to one of 2 mechanisms that create anisotropic rock in the crust. The first is aligned structures. These could be layers or aligned fractures in a fault zone. The second is microscopic crack alignment caused by the rock being under a horizontal stress. This second mechanism is usually the only one that might change over the sort of timescales that we monitor volcanoes. The idea being that as the magma reservoir becomes pressurised, it exerts stress on the surrounding rock and induces anisotropy. Large aligned cracks and layers don't usually change very rapidly. However, this eruption gave us a unique opportunity to see whether shear wave splitting can be used to detect the formation of these new fault zones, those being the caldera bounding ring faults. So finally, we're on to some new data. This is a map of Kilauea Summit showing the areas of strong anisotropy prior to the 2018 events. White triangles here are seismometers, and the colours represent the strength in anisotropy, with the warmer colours indicating stronger anisotropy. The shaded area is where the resolution is poor, so try not to focus on that area. The features that we can see have been fairly stable between 2008 and 2018. There was an area to the east side of the Halemaumau crater, which was associated with a shallow reservoir, and an area at the southeast of the caldera where the conduit to the East Rift Zone left the summit system. But the caldera faults also exhibited a slightly high anisotropy. So a reminder of the seismicity rates. Several hundred earthquakes building up to each of these collapse events that happened about every 18 hours. In an ideal world, I'd be able to use all of these earthquakes to create a snapshot of seismic anisotropy for each of these collapse events. But in reality, not all of those earthquakes can be used because they're too small, or they're too close together in time, or they're just too noisy. But I have been able to create several snapshots of the activity so far. So this is hot off the press, and my co-authors haven't even seen some of these images. Sorry, co-authors. The results definitely need a bit more QC, but seem to be fairly robust so far. First image is April, similar to previous results. Then moving on to May, there weren't many earthquakes in the summit area in May, but again, not that much different. But then I've managed to split June into 3 sections, and you can definitely see an evolution of the anisotropy. Note that towards the end of June, the anisotropy moves away from the previous caldera walls and the Halemaumau reservoir, but towards the area of new collapse. If you remember back to that map that I showed you, if you remember that the new crater was just bigger than the Halley Mattermelt crater and slightly centred to the northeast. So I'm still working on the July inversions, so watch this space. So I'm going to leave you with some take-home points. The 2018 eruption sequence at Kilauea was unique in a lot of ways and provided a really rich seismic dataset. The collapse of the Kilauea caldera produced enough earthquakes to invert for snapshots of anisotropy throughout the whole sequence, and shear wave splitting tomography elucidates the evolution of seismic anisotropy associated with new cracking as the caldera was collapsing. Thank you so much. I hope there's time for a few questions.